Hey folks, it's Christine and Library Llama, of course, coming to you from a very small meeting room turned storage space at the Granville Library. We're in the middle of construction right now, so space is valuable, so we do what we can. So Library Llama and I have some really good books that we want to tell you about today. But before I get into that, I do really quickly want to mention some programs that we have going on right now that you may or may not be aware of. The first one is the Wright, Michigan Short Story Contest. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's a short story contest. It is open to all ages, and you can submit your story in English or in Spanish. There are prizes to be won, of course, including the chance to get your story published in this year's Wright, Michigan Short Story Anthology. And then there are cash prizes as well. So if you're interested in that, just be mindful of the fact that the deadline to submit your story is approaching. You must submit it before noon on November 30. Now, for all you creative people out there who maybe writing isn't your thing, we have another program going on, which is the Kent County Teen Film Festival. We are also accepting, not applications, we're accepting your films right now. The deadline to submit your film is January 22. And again, there are a bunch of prizes to be won, and this is a chance to get your film out in front of the eyes of many viewers. So if you enjoy filmmaking, if it sounds interesting, if you want to act, get some friends together, make a really cool movie, and submit it to the contest for a chance to win. Now, when I'm telling you about one of these books today, you'll see a banner at the bottom of the screen, and that banner will tell you in what format the book is available and where you can get it from. So you'll notice the word branch. That just means your local KDL library branch. And if you see Hoopla or Libby, those are the apps that hold a bunch of ebooks and e-audiobooks that you can access with your KDL library card. So if you want more information about how to access Hoopla and Libby, you can go to kdl.org/downloads. Now, without further ado, the first book I am going to be telling you about today is a mystery, and it is by one of my favorite authors. Her name is Jennifer Lynn Barnes, and I really love her books, I think because all of her characters are really smart, they're sassy, they're maybe a little bit bitter at the world, and they never conform to what society kind of expects or necessarily wants from them. And that is very true of the main character in this book, The Inheritance Games. The main character's name is Avery, and Avery lives with her older sister, Libby. And the two of them are struggling to make ends meet. Avery works a part-time job in addition to going to school, and she's always trying to get really perfect grades because she very much wants to go to college, and she knows that that's not a possibility for her unless she can get some really good scholarships. Her plan is to get these scholarships, go to college, and major in something called statistical risk assessment, partly because she thinks it will allow her to get a job that will be really financially stable, and that's something she's never had before and something she's always wanted. But she also thinks it would be interesting because she figures it's as close as you can get to double majoring in math and poker, and Avery really enjoys poker. In fact, she actually runs a poker tournament in the school parking lot to get some extra cash. So she's very ambitious, and she's got her plan kind of laid out for what her future is going to look like. But then an eccentric billionaire named Tobias Hawthorne, who Avery has never met and is not related to, writes her into his will. And this completely upends all of her plans. And he did not write her into his will in a small way. In fact, he left almost everything to her, effectively disinheriting all of his kids and all of his grandkids. But there is a catch. In order for Avery to inherit what he's left for her, she must live in the Hawthorne mansion with the Hawthorne family for 1 full year. Now, Tobias Hawthorne was known to be fairly eccentric. He loved mysteries, puzzles, riddles, codes. He really just delighted in the search for an answer. So the theory is that this whole situation is basically a setup for one of his games, like this final end game kind of thing. It's something that's meant to be solved. But if that's the case, who is meant to solve it? Is it Avery? Is it his family? And what is the point of it all? So this book really reminded me of kind of a teen or even adult version of the game or of the book, The Westing Game, if you liked that story. And the characters are kind of John Green-esque. They're all very unique. They're quirky, maybe not entirely realistic, but super cool. The book is filled with hidden passageways, twists, turns, codes, and it's the first in the series, so the mystery does not end here. Second book is set to be published sometime next year. Next up, we have a graphic novel. It's called Displacement. I love the colors that the author uses throughout the graphic novel. And it is about a character named Kiku. And Kiku's grandmother, Ernestina, grew up partially in a Japanese internment camp during World War II. Now, these are camps that actually existed. They were created after the attack on Pearl Harbor because the US government thought that it was possible that maybe some Japanese Americans were spying for Japan. So without any evidence that this was happening, no trials, nothing, they locked up the Japanese Americans who were living on the West Coast at the time in these camps. And the people who were forced into these camps, they lost their homes, their businesses, basically anything they couldn't carry with them was stolen. Now, back to the book, Ernestina, Kiku's grandmother, never really talked about her time living in these camps later on in her life, and she actually died before Kiku was born. So Kiku really doesn't know very much about her grandmother or their family history. But all of that changes one day when Kiku is suddenly transported into the past, and she finds herself in the middle of a violin recital. And she realizes that the young woman on stage is actually her grandmother. Now, pretty much as soon as she realizes this, she is transported back into her own life, and she has no idea what happened. She had no control over it. But it keeps happening, and every time, Kiku is brought back to some point in her grandmother's life. But she never stays long, until one day, she is transported back in time, and she finds herself in a line of Japanese Americans waiting to get on a bus that will take them to one of these internment camps. And Kiku doesn't really know what's happening or what to do, so she just kind of follows along with the line. And she ends up being brought to one of these camps and living there. And for the first time, she doesn't get transported back into her own time, into her own life right away. And day after day after day is passing, and Kiku finds herself experiencing this part of her grandmother's life firsthand, and she's left wondering when, if ever, she will be able to return to her own home. This story is actually based on the real family history of the author, Kiku Hughes, minus the time travel aspects. I am guessing those are made up, but who knows? And it's really cool because a lot of the characters that Kiku meets, while she's in these internment camps are people that actually existed in real life, like Ernestina. And so you're able to kind of get to know these people from history, and you see why they made certain decisions, either to kind of go along with what was happening to try to survive, or maybe to try to stop it, to try to stand up for their rights. You get to see the reasoning behind those different decisions. And this is a look at a part of history that's rarely discussed. And I think it's really interesting because you're able to see it through this very unique lens of someone who was raised in the times that we were in like the 2000s, going back in time and seeing what is happening and learning about it and experiencing it firsthand. Next, I have a nonfiction book for you. It is about mountain climbing. Now, if I ask what's the tallest mountain on Earth, I am guessing most of you can probably come up with the name Everest. But what if I asked what the second tallest mountain on Earth was? I learned through reading this book that it is called Karakoram 2 or K2. And not only is it the second tallest mountain, but it is actually considered to be the most treacherous mountain to climb, even harder than Everest itself. So this book, Into the Clouds by Todd Olson, follows 3 different expeditions or groups as they try to summit K2. All three expeditions were kind of put together and supported by a group called the American Alpine Club. So a lot of the climbers are American, understandably. But one thing I really liked about this book and what Todd Olson did with it is that during these expeditions, it's not just Western climbers who are going on them. You also have a lot of Sherpas who are accompanying the Western climbers. And the Sherpas are kind of the native people of the Himalayas or of these regions where Everest and K2 are located. And they help carry a lot of the supplies up the mountain. But they're often carrying more supplies and heavier packs than the Western climbers do. And they are doing it with gear that is very inadequate. That's pretty substandard because this climbing gear is really expensive and they often can't afford the type of climbing gear that the Western climbers come equipped with. So the author really acknowledges in this book the immense contribution and achievement of the Sherpas. You actually get to know their names as well as the names of the Western climbers. You get to see what they're doing at every step along the way and what choices they're making. You even get the story of a selfless and heroic rescue attempt that some of the Sherpas try to attempt during one of these expeditions. So of these three expeditions, two of them are led by the same guy called Charlie Houston. And the one in between the first and the third, led by Charlie Houston, you get the second expedition, and that is led by Dudley Wolfe. And these two guys lead groups in completely different ways. Charlie Houston kind of sees climbing as this really democratic thing. The main concern for him is everyone's safety. He thinks everyone's responsible for each other. And they kind of have this methodology that they call the fellowship or the brotherhood of the rope. So everyone's looking out for each other. Everyone's making decisions based on what they think the collective good is. Meanwhile, Dudley Wolfe is climbing very much with the intent that he is going to make it to the summit at all costs. That is the most important thing. So it's interesting to see how those two ways of leading kind of pan out, especially as these groups are contending with hazardous terrain, unpredictable, vicious weather, severe illness and injury, and of course the ever-present possibility of human error that can easily prove fatal when you're climbing a mountain like this. This book is really fast-paced. I did not want to put it down. If you like survival stories, especially stories like the book Peak, I cannot recommend this book enough. Into the Clouds by Todd Olson. My final book for today is You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. When Liz Lightly's scholarship dreams fall through, she has to do something that she never thought she would ever do. Something completely and totally against her nature, not to mention against the keep your head down and don't attract attention mantra that she's been counting on to get her through high school. That thing is run for prom court. See, at Liz's school, prom is everything. Her town goes way overboard, from the promposals to the dance and everything in between. But the pièce de résistance is prom court. To get on prom court, you have to have a really good grade point average, you have to have a ton of volunteer hours, and you have to participate in a bunch of events, all to prove your worthiness. So the students who survive this cutthroat competition are then in the running to be elected prom king or queen by the rest of the student body. Now, the king and the queen are awarded large scholarships, hence why Liz is ignoring all of her better judgments and entering the race. She needs this scholarship to make her plans of becoming a doctor a reality, so she's throwing herself headfirst into the world of school spirit, popularity, and backstabbing. But will an overly ambitious campaign manager, a frenemy from her past, or a crush on one of her fellow prom queen contestants ruin her chances at the crown? Add 1 part romance, 1 part drama, with a dash of angst and some pop culture references thrown in, and you get You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for visiting and for taking a look at some of these books. If you decide to read them, I hope you enjoy them. And there will be more book talks the same time next week. Have a great day.